The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the old wooden floor. Ethan sat at his small kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of unpaid bills, job application forms, and a half-empty cup of cold coffee. His laptop screen glowed faintly, displaying yet another rejection email. He stared at it blankly, the words blurring together as frustration and exhaustion filled his mind. It had been months since he lost his job at the marketing firm. Each day felt heavier than the last, as if the world had decided to test how much one man could take before breaking. The once confident and driven Ethan had been replaced by someone unsure of his worth, his dreams fading into the background of survival. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, matching the rhythm of his tired heart. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as thoughts of giving up crept in. Maybe it's time to stop trying, he thought bitterly. The idea scared him, but for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. He felt small, invisible, swallowed by the weight of failure. Then, as his eyes drifted across the cluttered table, something caught his attention, a small, faded sticky note stuck to the side of his laptop. The handwriting was familiar, neat yet warm. Never stop believing in yourself. Love, Mom. His breath caught. That note had been there for years, written by his mother before she passed away. He hadn't noticed it in weeks. Now, it felt like a message sent through time, a whisper of love and strength just when he needed it most. Tears welled in his eyes. He picked up the note carefully, holding it like something sacred. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside, not certainty, not confidence, but a small, fragile spark of hope. And in that quiet, rain-soaked night, Ethan didn't know how, but he decided, he wasn't done yet. The morning after Ethan found his mother's note, the world looked a little different. The sun peeked through the clouds, and though his problems were still the same, something inside him had shifted. The small spark of hope that ignited the night before refused to fade. It whispered to him, telling him to take just one step, no matter how small. By afternoon, Ethan found himself standing outside a small diner on the corner of Maple Street. The handwritten sign in the window read, "Help Wanted, Night Shift Server." He hesitated, staring at it for several long seconds. He'd never worked in a diner before. He had a college degree, years of corporate experience, and pride that once kept him from taking any job he deemed beneath him. But that pride had brought him nothing but emptiness lately. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. A bell jingled softly above him. The smell of fresh coffee and grilled bacon filled the air. A woman behind the counter, probably in her 50s, looked up and smiled. "Looking for work?" she asked kindly. Ethan nodded. "Then grab an apron," she said with a laugh. "We start fast around here." That night, Ethan worked harder than he had in months. He carried trays, wiped tables, refilled coffee cups, and learned to balance plates like a pro. The customers were ordinary people, truck drivers, nurses, students, each with their own struggles, stories, and laughter. He realized something beautiful. Everyone here was just trying to make it through, one day at a time. When his shift ended, his feet ached and his hands smelled like coffee, but he felt something he hadn't in a long time, purpose. He walked home beneath the streetlights, exhausted but smiling. It wasn't a grand comeback. It wasn't success, but it was a start, his first step forward. And for Ethan, that one small hope had just turned into action. It was late one Friday night when the rain began to fall. Not a gentle drizzle, but a steady downpour that soaked everything in sight. The diner's neon lights flickered through the misty glass, painting the wet streets in red and blue hues. Inside, Ethan wiped down the last table, humming softly to himself as the clock struck midnight. The rain reminded him of the night he had found his mother's note, a night that changed everything. Just as he was about to close, a man in a dark gray suit rushed in, drenched and breathless. "You still open?" he asked, shivering slightly. Ethan nodded with a smile. "You're just in time. Coffee?" The man nodded gratefully and took a seat by the window. He looked exhausted, like someone who carried too many worries on his shoulders. They talked a little, small things at first. The man's name was Mr. Collins, a local business owner who had stayed late at work trying to fix a problem in his company. Ethan listened patiently, offering warmth and understanding that seemed to surprise the older man. When Collins finally finished his meal, he left a generous tip and hurried out, leaving behind a leather wallet on the counter. Ethan noticed it just as Collins' car disappeared into the rain. Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and ran outside, splashing through puddles until he caught up with him at a red light. "Hey, you forgot this," he shouted, holding up the wallet. Collins rolled down the window, his face lighting up in relief. "You just saved me a huge headache," he said, laughing. Soaked to the bone, Ethan smiled. Just doing the right thing. The next day, Collins returned, not as a customer, but with an offer. "You said you used to work in marketing, right? I could use someone like you on my creative team." Ethan blinked, stunned. That small act of honesty, that one moment of hope in action, had just opened a new door. Months passed, and Ethan's life began to shift in ways he could have never imagined. The small diner that had once been his refuge had led him to a new opportunity, a position at Mr. Collins' creative agency. It wasn't the biggest company in the city, but to Ethan, it felt like a second chance, a place where he could rebuild not just his career, but himself. On his first day, he felt nervous walking into the sleek glass building, clutching his notebook tightly. But Collins' warm handshake and simple words, "You belong here," eased his fears. Ethan threw himself into his work, spending long hours brainstorming ideas, sketching ad campaigns, and finding inspiration in everyday moments. Slowly, his creativity, once buried under months of doubt, began to flow again. One evening, while staring at a half-finished design, Ethan remembered his mother's note. He pinned the small sticky paper above his desk, "Never stop believing in yourself." It became his quiet source of strength whenever deadlines piled up or ideas ran dry. Weeks turned into months, and soon, Ethan's talent started to shine. He created a campaign for a local nonprofit that went viral, highlighting stories of ordinary people rising from hardship. The project touched thousands and caught the attention of major clients. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't just working, he was making a difference. Mr. Collins called him into his office one morning, a proud smile on his face. "Ethan, I knew you had something special. You didn't just design an ad, you gave people hope." Those words hit deep. Hope, that small, fragile thing that once kept him alive during his darkest days, was now what he was giving to others. That night, Ethan returned to the diner, not as a worker but as a mentor. He shared coffee with new staff, telling them softly, "Sometimes, one small step can change your whole life." And as he left, rain falling gently outside, he smiled, knowing that his rise began the moment he chose hope over fear. Years later, Ethan stood backstage at a large community event in downtown Chicago. A banner hung behind the podium, "The Power of Hope, Stories That Inspire." The audience filled every seat, a sea of faces waiting to hear from those who had turned pain into purpose. As the announcer called his name, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight, his heart pounding, not from fear, but gratitude. He looked out over the crowd, hundreds of people, young and old, all searching for a spark of hope, just as he once had. He smiled softly before beginning. "A few years ago," he said, "I was sitting alone in a small apartment, surrounded by bills, fear, and silence. I thought my life was over." The room grew quiet, but then, I saw a simple note, just 7 words written by my mother: "Never stop believing in yourself." That one small hope changed everything. He spoke about the diner, the kindness of strangers, the rain-soaked night when honesty led to opportunity, and the new life that followed. His story wasn't about luck or talent, it was about choosing to keep going, even when nothing made sense. "Hope," he said, isn't a miracle that fixes everything. It's a seed you plant when the world feels barren. And if you nurture it, even a little, it grows. As he finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the faded sticky note. The edges were worn, the ink slightly smudged, but the message was still clear. He held it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, his voice trembling, "was my beginning." The crowd rose to their feet, applause filling the hall. Ethan blinked back tears, smiling through the roar of appreciation. In that moment, he realized, his mother's words hadn't just saved him, they had touched every person who heard his story. And as the lights dimmed and the applause echoed, Ethan knew the truth, one small hope really had changed everything.